Hello, seventh grade. Welcome to, I believe, week 6 of our online learning experience. Great job once again so far. You guys are doing really good work with all of this. It's a tough, weird thing, but I've seen a lot of good quality stuff coming from you, so keep it up. Today what we're doing is we're going to finish up No Gumption by Russell Baker. Now this, as you may remember, is a nonfiction autobiography. What that means is it's a story written by the author about his own life. So in this story so far, last week we talked about how Russell, his mom wanted him to get a job to help out with their family during the Great Depression, which is when they lived. So she had him meet with somebody from this company called the Saturday Evening Post, and they set him up with a bag and a job to go sell their newspaper on street corners. And so Russell went to try to sell this newspaper, but it didn't go so well for him. And so he came back and talked to his mom about it, and she told him that he, instead of just standing on the street corner and waiting for people to come to him, he had to go to them to try to sell what he had. And so our story, we left off right there, and so he's about to go out and try again. So what I'd like you to do is just listen to this, and I'll have 3 vocab words for you to look up, either on Google, in a dictionary, or in the book. Well, these ones actually might not be in the book, so either on Google or in a dictionary. And then select the correct definition from the list in Edpuzzle as we go. All right, let's begin. And so I set forth with my sack of magazines. I was afraid of the dogs that snarled behind the doors of potential buyers. I was timid about ringing the doorbells of strangers, relieved when no one came to the door, and scared when someone did. Despite my mother's instructions, I could not deliver an engaging sales pitch. When a door opened, I simply asked, "Want to buy a Saturday Evening Post?" In Belleville, few persons did. It was a town of 30,000 people, and most weeks I rang a fair majority of its doorbells, but I rarely sold my 30 copies. Some weeks I canvassed the entire town for 6 days, and still had 4 or 5 unsold magazines on Monday evening. Then I dreaded the coming Tuesday morning, when a batch of 30 fresh Saturday Evening Posts was due at the front door. "Better get out there and sell the rest of the magazines tonight," my mother would say. I usually posted myself then at a busy intersection where a traffic light controlled commuter flow from Newark. When the light turned red, I stood on the curb and shouted my sales pitch at motorists. "Want to buy the Saturday Evening Post?" One rainy night, when car windows were sealed against me, I came back soaked and with not a single sale to report. My mother beckoned to Doris. "Go back down there with Buddy and show him how to sell these magazines," she said. Brimming with zest, Doris, who was then 7 years old, returned with me to the corner. She took a magazine from the bag, and when the light turned red, she strode to the nearest car and banged her small fist against the closed window. The driver, probably startled at what he took to be a midget assaulting his car, lowered the window to stare, and Doris thrust a Saturday Evening Post at him. "You need this magazine," she piped, "and it only costs a nickel." Her salesmanship was irresistible. Before the light changed half a dozen times, she disposed of the entire batch. I didn't feel humiliated. To the contrary, I was so happy I decided to give her a treat. Leading her to the vegetable store on Belleville Avenue, I bought 3 apples, which cost a nickel, and gave her 1. "You shouldn't waste money," she said. "Eat your apple." I bit into mine. "You shouldn't eat before supper," she said. "It'll spoil your appetite." Back at the house that evening, she dutifully reported me for wasting a nickel. Instead of a scolding, I was rewarded with a pat on the back for having the good sense to buy fruit instead of candy. My mother reached into her bottomless supply of maxims and told Doris, "An apple a day keeps the doctor away." Okay, this is our first word I would like you to look up. The word is maxim, and it's spelled M-A-X-I-M. Go ahead and Google that, look it up in a dictionary, or I believe this one actually is in our book, and select the correct definition from the list on Edpuzzle. All right, hopefully you found that maxim means a wise saying. And so when the author writes, "My mother reached into her bottomless supply of maxims," It's like a figurative way or a fancy way of saying that the mom sort of like reached into her memory for all of the for one of the wise sayings that she had stored up in her brain. All right, let's keep going. By the time I was 10, I'd learned all my mother's maxims by heart. Asking to stay up past normal bedtime, I knew that a refusal would be explained with, "Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." If I whimpered about having to get up early in the morning, I could depend on her to say, "The early bird gets the worm." The one I most despised was, "If at first you don't succeed, try again." This was the battle cry with which she constantly sent me back into the hopeless struggle whenever I moaned that I had rung every doorbell in town and knew there wasn't a single potential buyer left in Belleville that week. After listening to my explanation, she handed me the canvas bag and said, "If at first you don't succeed." 3 years in that job, which I would gladly have quit after the first day except for her insistence, produced at least one valuable result. My mother finally concluded that I would never make something of myself by pursuing a life in business and started considering careers that demanded less competitive zeal. Okay, this is our second word. The word is zeal, spelled Z-E-A-L. Go ahead and look that up on Google or in the dictionary. This one I do not believe is in our book. Okay, hopefully you found something along the lines of zeal being like an excitement or a determination to do something. So when she says that she doesn't expect that he would make something of himself by pursuing a life in business, and then she decided to consider careers that demanded less competitive zeal, what she was saying there was she decided to consider careers that demanded less competitive determination, or like had less of required less of a desire for the person working that job to be really competitive. Okay, let's move on. One evening when I was 11, I brought home a short composition on my summer vacation, which the teacher had graded with an A. Reading it with her own schoolteacher's eye, my mother agreed that it was top-drawer 7th grade prose and complimented me. Nothing more was said about it immediately, but a new idea had taken life in her mind. Halfway through supper, she suddenly interrupted the conversation. "Buddy," she said, "maybe you could be a writer." I clasped the idea to my heart. I had never met a writer, had shown no previous urge to write, and hadn't a notion how to become a writer. But I loved stories, and thought that making up stories must surely be almost as much fun as reading them. Best of all, though, and what really gladdened my heart, was the ease of the writer's life. Writers did not have to trudge through the town, peddling from canvas bags, defending themselves against angry dogs, being rejected by surly strangers. Okay, our last word that I'd like you to look up is pedal. Now, this spelling of the word pedal is P-E-D-D-L-E. So make sure you type that in instead of P-E-D-A-L. That will give you a different word than what we need. So go ahead and look that up on Google or in the dictionary. All right, hopefully you found that pedal means to sell something. Okay, so he was saying that he was excited because the job of writing would not require him to go and try to sell his writing door to door like he had been with this newspaper. Okay. Writers did not have to ring doorbells. So far as I could make out, what writers did couldn't even be classified as work. I was enchanted. Writers didn't have to have any gumption at all. I did not dare tell anyone for fear of being laughed at in the schoolyard, but secretly I decided that what I'd like to be when I grew up was a writer. Remember that this is an autobiography, so this story is about the writer's own life, and so he did grow up to be a writer. Do you remember the word gumption means motivation? He said that writers didn't have to have any gumption at all, or have any motivation. But I wonder if he found out later in his life that in order to be a writer, you really do have to have lots of motivation. In order to do any job well, you have to have lots of motivation. All right, that is the end of what we're doing for today. Tomorrow we'll be doing comprehension questions about this story. So, good work. and I'll talk to you tomorrow.